Hey heroes, welcome to another fantastic episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This show is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in polls that help decide what gets covered on the channel, you can sign up for $1 per month over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below. Before we dive right into the main topic for today, I want to take a little time to talk about the men who created Adam Warlock in the first place, the Enclave. This group has seemingly been in the background of the Marvel Universe since long before the dawn of the modern superhero. Their eldest member, a Polish scientist named Władysław Shinsky, mentored a young Arnim Zola in the 1920s. Zola would go on to become a notorious Nazi supervillain and battled Captain America for decades. In 1928, Shinsky was the keynote speaker at a genetics conference in Switzerland. There, he met an English geneticist named Herbert Edgar Wyndham and his American associate Jonathan Drew. Wyndham sought to accelerate the evolutionary process by artificially inducing genetic mutation in living subjects. Shinsky warned against such ideas, considering that kind of work dangerous if the genetic code wasn't fully understood. But Wyndham went on to become known as the High Evolutionary, while Jonathan Drew fathered Jessica Drew, the original Spider-Woman. Shinsky eventually joined forces with three like-minded individuals: an American marine biologist named Jerome Hamilton, a Lithuanian nuclear physicist named Maris Morlack, and a Spanish electronics technician, Carlo Zota. Those three were initially known as the Scientists Guild, and in 1939 they visited Professor Phineas Horton to witness his latest creation, the flaming android known as the Human Torch. While we didn't know this was them until recently, this means that Morlack, Zota, and Hamilton technically first appeared in the very first book the company ever put out with Marvel Comics #1. In the early 1940s, they also briefly operated as a crime-busting team known as the 3 X's. During this time, they became interested in an artifact known as the Eternity Mask. This mystical hood was notably worn by a vigilante gunslinger known as the Masked Rider in the mid-1800s and many others both before and after. The 3 X's obtained the mask from a private detective known as the Ferret. He was another 1940s crime buster who solved mysteries, sometimes with the help of an actual ferret named Nosey. No, seriously, his pet ferret actually helped him fight crime. But before he was the Ferret, he was known as the Operative, and wore the Eternity Mask in his crusade against the corrupt social elite during the Great Depression. Anyway, the mask is probably something that we could talk about for an entire video, and maybe someday we will. In 1941, the Scientists Guild allied themselves with the US government and used the Eternity Mask to empower a man named Jerry Carstairs, allowing him to become the Thunderer, later known as the Dark Avenger, to battle criminals and Nazis. However, the mask refused to work for them when the Guild pursued their own hubristic goals. They believed that they represented a generation of what they called X-humans, and that they should guide this next stage of humanity by any means necessary, including world domination. Ironically, they may not have actually been aware of the mutant X gene, and so the similar naming there is seemingly purely coincidental. But by 1958, Morlack, Zota, and Hamilton joined forces with Władysław Shinsky, who insisted that a perfect world must be controlled by a race of perfect humans. With this goal in mind, the Scientists Guild was transformed into the Enclave. They would have plenty of time to accomplish this as well, as Shinsky provided the group with longevity treatments that staved off the effects of aging for decades. At some point, Shinsky reportedly received information and equipment from the rogue Inhuman Fader and his half-deviant son Maelstrom. I've talked about both the Inhumans and the Deviants on the channel before, so I won't belabor the point too much here, but both are basically offshoots of humanity. The Deviants were created alongside the Eternals roughly 1 million years ago by the space gods known as the Celestials, whereas the Inhumans were the result of genetic experimentation on humans by an alien race called the Kree. With inhuman technology, Shinsky had a clear head start over most other human scientists, although some others, like the previously mentioned High Evolutionary, were also granted knowledge by Fader. From his colleague Daniel Damian, who would also later have connections to the Eternals, the Enclave member Jerome Hamilton learned of an island in the North Atlantic containing the ruins of an abandoned Deviant outpost. Over the following year, one by one, the 4 Enclave members faked their deaths and traveled to that island. There, they employed technicians and mercenaries, building on the back of what they had found, to erect a citadel of science, which would come to be known as the Beehive. There they labored in secret and made a series of technological breakthroughs. Of course, their primary goal was still to create a race of perfect humans to rule the Earth, and eventually they engineered a prototype embryo. However, the Enclave lost control over their creation when it reached maturity and began radiating a blinding light. Seeking someone that could get close to him, the Enclave abducted the blind sculptress, Ayesha Masters, who found the new lifeform encased in a cocoon. Fearing their creation would endanger mankind, Jerome Hamilton attempted to terminate it. However, the new being emerged, and while Ayesha was rescued by her boyfriend, Ben Grimm, better known as the Thing from the Fantastic Four, Hamilton was seemingly killed and left under the collapsing rubble. This new being, a golden man known at the time only as Him, left the Earth, seemingly destroying the Beehive in the process. Now, Hamilton, it seems, actually survived and claimed the Eternity Mask for himself, but maybe that's a story for another day. Him wandered space for a time and eventually came upon the High Evolutionary. He had just completed the construction of Counter-Earth, a duplicate of the original Earth but with no superhumans. However, this new world was tainted thanks to the interference of his previous failed experiment, the Man-Beast. The High Evolutionary would have simply destroyed the planet to start over, but Him volunteered to go to Counter-Earth and battle the Man-Beast instead. To aid him in this task, the High Evolutionary gave him the Soul Gem, later identified as one of the 6 Infinity Gems, as well as the name Warlock. However, it was the people of Counter-Earth who called him Adam, giving him a full name. Now, there's a lot more of Adam Warlock's adventures we could talk about, some of which we touched on years ago when we first discussed his origin. But for today, we're actually going to turn our attention back to the real Earth and the Beehive. While Hamilton was presumed dead, Zota, Shinsky, and Morlock survived and rebuilt their citadel of science. Undeterred by the failure of Him, they began their second attempt at producing a perfect being with Paragon. They also tricked the world-renowned neurosurgeon Dr. Stephen Strange into helping them modify their creation's brain and ensure its subservience. However, before that was complete, Paragon became self-aware inside the cocoon, interfaced with the Beehive's computer system so that it could learn about Him, and implanted a post-hypnotic command into its own mind. Initially, the Enclave's labors seemed to be successful, and Paragon emerged with the appearance of a male human. To test their creation, the scientists ordered him to destroy Dr. Strange. Paragon was even able to subdue the Hulk when the Green Goliath came to aid his ally. However, the post-hypnotic command that Paragon had placed inside itself took effect, causing it to change form, undoing the surgery that rendered it subservient. It then finished what Adam Warlock started, destroying the Beehive and sinking the island it was on once and for all. However, Shinsky, Morlock, and Zota survived once again and sold technology to Hydra to finance further schemes. Meanwhile, Paragon placed itself back into a cocoon to metamorphosize yet again. It came to the conclusion that its purpose was to mate with the Enclave's previous creation, Him, and so it allowed its cocoon to drift closer to New York City, where it was fished out of the water by confused dock workers. There it emerged in female form as her, so it could usher in a new perfect race with him. The reason she came to New York was to speak with Ayesha Masters, one of the few people on Earth she knew had encountered him directly. This of course put her into conflict with Ben Grimm, the Thing. However, her presence also attracted the attention of a space-faring psychic known as Moondragon. We've briefly talked about her before, but the short version is that she was the daughter of Drax the Destroyer, who owned her psionic abilities and martial arts prowess while being raised by the Eternals of Titan. Moondragon told her what she knew about him and how he had taken the name Adam Warlock. However, the news was not all good, as Adam had reportedly perished in a battle against someone I'm sure needs no explanation at this point, the Mad Titan Thanos. This battle occurred early in Thanos' quest for the 6 soul gems before their true nature and infinite potential was truly understood. The Mad Titan fought with the heroes of Earth during this time as well, but in the end he was defeated by the spirit of Adam Warlock, who briefly manifested as the Ultimate Avenger, before disappearing back into the soul world contained within the soul gem. After his death, Warlock's body was buried on the High Evolutionary's counter-Earth. Moondragon, Ayesha, and her attempted to travel to his grave, but found that world was missing. What followed was a quest to find it involving the High Evolutionary, the Thing, and a Guardian of the Galaxy from the future known as Starhawk. In the end, they discovered that the planet thief was an alien named Sphinxor who was working on behalf of the Beyonders, who we've talked about on the channel before as well. Finally reaching Counter-Earth, her used her nascent cosmic powers to fully restore Adam's body. However, his resurrection was incomplete since his soul was elsewhere. Not knowing that Adam's spirit still resided within the soul gem, which at the time was held by the Elder of the Universe known as the Gardener, her returned his body to its resting place. The Thing attempted to offer her some comfort, but overwhelmed by these new emotions, her fled into space. Searching for enlightenment, she eventually came upon a planet called Usurpria, named after a mutant member of the native population who had taken control of the world, Usurper. Under his rule, the Usurprians were forced into a period of rapid industrial growth that devastated the planet's ecosystem, while Usurper himself lived comfortably in one small area that still had clean air and vegetation. Enraged by the injustice, her deposed the corrupt ruler and freed the enslaved people. In gratitude, the Usurprians named her She Whose Trail Dusts Hope, or Juridia Starduster. She also rejected their attempts to worship her like a god and instead helped them begin rebuilding the planet as an equal. But the situation wasn't quite over yet, since Usurper had made deals with an intergalactic business conglomerate called the Consortium. With the planet's return to a more agricultural state, profits stalled and the Consortium came to investigate. Leading the warships away from the planet, Juridia headed back to Earth to recruit allies in the conflict. She tried to reach Ben Grimm in New York, but the Consortium ships blasted her as she approached the Earth, causing her to fall into Toronto instead. Fortunately, she was able to enlist the aid of Canada's premier superhero team Alpha Flight, and was aided by their American allies the Avengers as well. When the ensuing battle began to threaten the Earth, Juridia prepared to surrender herself. But before she could, she and several members of both teams were abducted by a completely different alien race, the Kuwerlans. This was so they could deal with a problem threatening that people, the World Eater Galactus. Ultimately, the heroes killed 2 birds with 1 stone by sending Galactus to the living planet that powered the Consortium's motherships. In one fell swoop, 3 planets were saved and the Consortium's armada was crippled. It was during this whole ordeal that Juridia first met a human hero wielding a pair of quantum bands, Quasar. She stayed on Earth for a time, again adopting the simple moniker of Her. Meanwhile, out in space, Thanos completed his quest to assemble the 6 Infinity Gems into a gauntlet that gave him infinite power. Drax the Destroyer and the Silver Surfer attempted to oppose him, but Thanos banished them into the Soul Gem, where they encountered the spirit of Adam Warlock. With the threat Thanos posed to the universe greater than ever, the trapped souls escaped, and Adam Warlock was resurrected. A fact that Her soon learned when she encountered the Surfer herself and sensed her counterpart's energy residue on his body. She subsequently donned a costume similar to the one he wore and approached him. However, Adam had no interest in procreation, especially while the crisis surrounding the Infinity Gauntlet was still ongoing, and dismissed her. Following this, she meditated on her purpose and realized that she was terribly misguided in her assumption that him was her perfect mate. In fact, he may have been one of the worst possible choices since the two were genetically identical, effectively making them twins. And so instead, she decided to find a more suitable mate on Earth. As part of a plan to accomplish this, she affixed cocoons containing her own genetic material to the backs of 6 male superhumans: Wonder Man, Hyperion, Hercules, Doc Samson, Icarus, and Gilgamesh. When Wendell Vaughn, Quasar, tried to oppose this plan, she planted one on him as well. This also put her into conflict with Moondragon, who pursued Quasar for similar purposes. While Her clashed with those two, the Avengers successfully removed the genetic pods from the other men. Since Quasar was the only one to express concern over the fate of the cocoons, mistakenly thinking they may have been fetuses of some kind — they weren't, they wouldn't have been viable on their own — Her decided that he was her ideal mate. However, he then helped her realize that her desire to breed was not the result of her own decision-making, but deep-seated programming from her father's, the Enclave. With that in mind, she began to rethink her purpose, removing Quasar's cocoon as well, but decided to stay close with him. After that, she was involved in the events of Operation Galactic Storm, during which much of the Kree Empire was destroyed. In the aftermath of the conflict, Her traveled to the devastated Kree homeworld of Hala with Quasar and the Eternal Makari. There, they freed the spirits of the planet's deceased inhabitants from a creature called the Soul Eater. They also encountered a group of aliens known as the Mourners, who wandered the universe paying respects to the dead. She decided to travel with them for a time, and together they reached the planet Scottum, while it was still in the midst of its destruction at the hand of an armada of pirates called the Black Fleet. Unwilling to stand by and watch, Her fought against the pirates. While she never felt that battle was her purpose, it seemed to be her destiny, her Kismet, to find it, and so she took the name Kismet for herself. But she was still one woman against an entire armada, and eventually began to be overwhelmed. When her injuries started to scab over, she realized that if she continued to fight, her body would eventually revert to its cocoon state to heal. In order to prevent this, she retreated down to the planet so she could recover and get back to the fight faster. But while she was down there, a blinding flash of cosmic energy destroyed the Black Fleet. She began investigating, but was somewhat stranded when she lost track of the energy and was separated from the Mourners. She eventually made her way back to Earth, where she sensed the same cosmic power coming from a woman named Kayla Ballantyne, Quasar's girlfriend, who had been empowered by an enigmatic energy source called the Starbrand, which we really should talk about more someday. Anyway, Kismet's questioning led to an argument that turned into a fight when Kayla lashed out. During the battle, the power of the Starbrand overwhelmed Kismet, rupturing her power cells and causing her to revert to cocoon state before falling into the harbor. She was subsequently retrieved by Quasar and brought to the energy research facility known as Project Pegasus for safekeeping. In the meantime, we must turn our attention back to the 3 members of the Enclave. While they made attempts to continue their work after years of setbacks, eventually Shinsky's advanced age began to catch up with him when he suffered his first stroke. In order to save his life, they struck a deal with a rival cabal of evil scientists, Advanced Idea Mechanics, or AIM. With funding provided by AIM, as well as a new lab assistant named Frank, Warlock and Zota were able to steal Kismet's cosmic cocoon from Project Pegasus. An unfinished Kismet was removed from her shell while Shinsky was placed inside to recuperate. However, they did ensure that their creation survived the process. When Shinsky awakened, he expressed regret over his life's work and regarded Kismet as a daughter. Warlock and Zota, meanwhile, tricked her into letting them take a sample of her DNA, intending on using it to endow themselves with meta-human powers. But they were thwarted by their assistant Frank, who was actually an AIM adaptoid designated Agent MST-3K. And after absorbing Kismet's genetic sample himself, he was transformed into a second Paragon. Although not at full strength, Kismet was forced to battle someone bearing a name and appearance she'd long since abandoned. However, this Paragon was ultimately killed by Shinsky using a genetic virus, one the Enclave had prepared just in case Kismet turned against them. Unsure of what to make of all of this, Kismet returned her father to his cocoon, but Shinsky asked her to save Warlock and Zota as well, both of whom were grievously injured by Frank. And so she created regenerative pods for all three and watched over her fathers as if she were their mother. Quasar found her 2 days later after learning of her abduction. He asked her if she wanted to join him on another trip into space, but Kismet decided to stay with the cocoons. However, the result of her decision was not what she expected when a mysterious energy blast from space caused the cocoons to hatch. The 3 Enclave members had been transformed into cosmic beings like Kismet and Warlock, albeit not as powerful. Furthermore, they soon found that they had been cosmically connected and could not travel more than 10 meters away from one another. Having become the kind of being they longed to create, the Enclave attempted to use their powers to cure the world's problems. But in their hubris, their short-sighted solutions often resulted in things being worse than before. Wanting to learn more about their powers, the Enclave accompanied Kismet into space, searching for the source of the energy blast when they tracked it to a cosmic being known as Catalyst. Mistakenly believing that he was a threat, the Enclave attacked Catalyst and were absorbed by him. Kismet's attempts to rescue her fathers inadvertently opened an interdimensional rift that threatened them all, but together she, Catalyst, and the Silver Surfer were able to repair the damage done, and ultimately the Enclave members were released alive. However, it seems the cosmic powers they gained were actually temporary. Upon reverting to human form, Zota, Warlock, and Shinsky returned to Earth and rebuilt the Enclave. Following that, they launched an assault on the Tibetan monks who built Dr. Doom's armor. Perhaps more mad than ever before, Warlock and Shinsky forced the survivors to build them matching sets of armor, and with them the two men shared the masked identity of Crucible. They even enslaved Kismet, changing her into a new form named Ayesha, and using her to battle the Fantastic Four. The Enclave also built a new beehive in the war-torn nation of Genosha, putting them into conflict with the Genosian Chief Magistrate Tam Anderson. It was actually Anderson who defeated both Crucible and Ayesha, using a black hole grenade to banish both to another dimension, sacrificing herself in the process. Now, this may seem like an ignominious end for Kismet, but it's been reported that she has since returned in her classic form. While we don't have much confirmation of that, she was briefly seen participating in another massive battle with the Mad Titan Thanos, alongside hundreds of other superpowered beings. While this is ultimately little more than a cameo, I think it's safe to say that we'll eventually see Kismet again. After all, Shinsky and Warlock were later seen alive again as members of a reunited Enclave. They attempted to create another perfect being, a female Warlock Delta, but due to the intervention of the original Adam Warlock, Delta was endowed with a sense of right and wrong, and was able to resist the Enclave's control. And that's really all I have for you this time, but if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, share the video, and subscribe for more marvelous content. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me, including my Patreon page, where for only $1 a month you can get your name in these special thanks here. So until next time, true believers, Excelsior!